This morning, I will attempt to repay some measure of the kindness of my teachers as I share with you some of my recent reflections on the Dogen fascicle that I was invited to talk about this morning, which is Raihai Tokuzui. It's a multi-dimensional, layered, deep, and broad teaching, which can be said about many of Dogen's fascicles. And it's full of allusions to many other Mahayana Zen teaching stories that we won't be able to go into today, but even without unpacking for you those stories this morning, I hope we can still taste together some of the marrow of Dogen's Raihai Tokuzui. So Raihai means to prostrate oneself to, and Toku means to get or to attain, and Zui means the marrow. So Raihai Tokuzui has been translated in a few ways. One, prostrating to the marrow of attainment. That's the Nishijima and Cross translation. Another, making a bow and getting the marrow, is our most recent translation by the Soto Zen Text Project. And lastly, receiving the marrow, bowing, is Tanahashi's translation. In the Nishijima Cross translation, there's a note regarding the title of the fascicle, which reads, quote, "In other words, revering what has got the truth." I really appreciate that clarity, revering what has got the truth. So this fascicle is about revering the truth, attaining the truth, paying respect, and getting the marrow. How many of you, may I ask, have read this fascicle recently enough to remember anything about it? Just maybe a show of hands. Okay. So for many of you, this is your first exposure. Wonderful. Even though I don't have nearly enough time to do this fascicle justice this morning, I am going to hinder myself even further by sharing a koan that feels very resonant to me with what I wish to share regarding my reading of the fascicle. This koan is case 3 in the Blue Cliff record. Master Ma was unwell. The koan goes, "Great Master Ma was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, 'Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?' The great master said, 'Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha.'" In Dogen's Raihai Tokuzui, there's a sun-faced Buddha and a moon-faced Buddha, I would say, side by side or together, at times in apparent juxtaposition. And sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha are one Buddha. The relative and the ultimate are one Buddha. I'd like to acknowledge from the outset that the bulk of this fascicle, quantitatively speaking, while important, radical, and fearless in its rebuke of discrimination among so-called practitioners of the Buddha way, discrimination specifically against female teachers and practitioners on the basis of their sex and gender, but also other forms of discrimination. While the bulk of this fascicle consists of Dogen specifically and severely rebuking various discriminatory practices that he recognized in Japan during his lifetime, and referring to those practices as not only ignorant, but really despicable, given how they contradicted the foundational core and highest teachings of the Buddha Dharma and the inclusive teachings of the Buddha himself. Although the rebuke and Dogen's counter-examples of those practices comprise most of this fascicle, in my mind, the heart of Dogen's teaching in this fascicle is his primary teaching, I would say, is offered in the first page and a half. By secondary and primary teachings, I mean secondary in the way the light of the moon is secondary to the light of the sun, borrowed from the light of the sun, which is primary. In other words, if we don't really hear, take to heart, and have some clear understanding of Dogen's teaching in the first page and a half of the fascicle, then there is perhaps no fundamental spiritual basis for the rest of it. If we don't have some clear understanding of what he's saying at the beginning, then we're likely to hear the remainder in a purely mundane, secular, dualistic, social political way. I'd like to read an excerpt from the fascicle that is Dogen quoting Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching. Much of Dogen's admonishment, to put it gently, throughout the fascicle rests upon his faith in and understanding of Shakyamuni Buddha's inclusion of monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen Sangha. Quote, Shakyamuni Buddha said, in encountering teachers who expound unsurpassable enlightenment, do not consider their caste or facial appearance. Do not dislike their shortcomings or judge their activities. Just value their wisdom and feed them daily with 100 or 1,000 ounces of gold. Offer them celestial meals. Sprinkle celestial flowers for them. Bow and pay respect to them 3 times a day. And do not arouse the mind of confusion. If you act in this way, the path of enlightenment will certainly have a place. This is how I have practiced since I aroused the aspiration for enlightenment. And now I have attained unsurpassable, complete enlightenment. Unquote. This excerpt is a teaching regarding how to pay respect to a true teacher of the way. And it emphasizes not reflecting upon the teacher with the mind of discrimination, not relating to them on the level of appearances, not meeting them with a dualistic mind, but paying obeisance to their wisdom and regarding them as being of great value, as a being upon whom no amount of honor is too great to bestow. We simply bow down with our whole being, it says, giving ourselves over completely to suchness or thusness, paying homage to the perfection of wisdom. In this way, according to one translation of the fascicle, we receive or attain the marrow. What is the marrow? According to the teaching, it is Anuttara Samyak Sambuddhi, or complete perfect awakening. Even though I personally don't relate to the reference to bowing in the title of the fascicle as a reference primarily to the physical act of bowing, I'm aware that some people do understand or relate to it quite strongly in that way, and I respect that. Bowing, physical prostrations, is a very significant part of our formal ritual and ceremonial practices in the school of Soto Zen Buddhism. During the 3-month practice periods at Tassajara, there is quite a lot of bowing and many, many full prostrations. There are 3 regular services per day, as you may be familiar with from your sessions, morning, noon, evening, and the refuges at the end of the night, not to mention special ceremonies such as full moon ceremonies. As the Shuso, or head student, during the most recent winter practice period at Tassajara, I ran the wake-up bell through the grounds of the monastery every single morning. And that ceremony includes 6 prostrations before and after ringing the bell. Afterward, the Shuso, in addition to the leader of the practice period, does a morning jundo, kentan, and zendo, a morning greeting, every morning. And that ceremony includes 3 more prostrations. The Shuso is also often the doshi for morning service when the Shuso is a priest. And during morning service, the doshi does 40 full prostrations, mostly at the very beginning and at the end during the chanting of the names of the male and female sisters. So by the end of the day, as you saw, it is not uncommon to have done somewhere upwards of 70 ceremonial full prostrations and many, many additional standing bows throughout the day. One could say that being Shuso at Tassajara is a 3-month ceremony of bowing to the Marrow. As I was saying, even though I consider the bulk of the Raihai Tokuzui to be of a kind of secondary importance, I'm going to begin by saying a bit about the bulk of it, without actually going into it in any detail, because we don't have much time together this morning. It's my hope that what I say will whet your appetite, and that sometime not long after this talk, you will read the fascicle in its entirety for yourself. As much as many Soto Zen teachers revere, highly praise Dogen's written teachings, many of the same individuals have experienced some difficulty with the harsh language that he sometimes utilizes in his teaching. People have found it difficult to reconcile such language with the Buddhist teachings on right speech and with Dogen's own teachings on right speech. And for instance, the 4 embracing actions of a bodhisattva, which is another one of Dogen's fascicles in which he talks about kind speech. I don't think we need to reflect on Dogen's style of teaching entirely and critically. In fact, I believe that any well-considered, wholehearted critique offered with love to teachers who we greatly esteem and to whom we feel indebted with gratitude is an offering of deep respect and repayment of their sincerity. In this fascicle, sincerity is emphasized by Dogen, and he himself taught that we must go beyond our teachers. We must keep going, not beyond the Buddha Dharma, but beyond our teachers' expressions, and to grow in our capacity to go beyond limited views, those we consider our own views and those that we consider to belong to others. While recently studying this fascicle, I found myself needing to go beyond some views in which I found myself ensnared. In Gyoji, another one of Dogen's fascicles, translated Continuous Practice, he wrote, even though some people speak of preserving the words and deeds of the teacher, quote, if you do not surpass the teacher, you do not repay the teacher's kindness, unquote. What does it mean to surpass the teacher? I think it means we must each do our best to bring the Dharma to life in our own contemporary contexts, moment after moment, for the benefit of those with whom we live, work, and practice. We must do our best, do this to the best of our ability to, and in accord with our own understanding and practice realizations. In this way, we repay the sincerity and the kindness of our teachers. Surpassing the teacher doesn't mean to become better than, wiser than, correct than the teacher. At least, not as I understand it. I think of it more as contributing to the continuous completion of the teachings, the continuous application of the teachings in ways that fully include and meet the present circumstances and conditions of our time. Things as it is, here and now, moment after moment. In my mind, that also means acknowledging the fact that the particular skillful means there and then in the time and place of our teachers, living or no longer living, those means were situated in a different relative set of circumstances than those in which we find ourselves one step removed, one moment removed even, or 800 years removed from Dogen's situated moments in time. The relative circumstances of the past and the skillful means for which they called can never be fully known here and now. I'm saying all of this because I think it's very tempting for many of us who study this fascicle today to try to accurately judge Dogen's approach to calling out what he saw as a corruption of the Buddha Dharma, calling out what he saw as a glaring expression of ignorance and hypocrisy being displayed by so-called ordained Buddhist practitioners engaged in discriminating against true teachers on the basis of gender in particular. I noticed myself first feeling rather uncomfortable with and then critical of some of Dogen's harsh language in this fascicle, not for the first time. And then I found myself wanting to rationalize it. First critical and on the grounds that it appeared to break some precepts, particularly those regarding speech, and then later rationalizing his language on the grounds that in the Vinaya, in the early Pali teachings, as well as in Mahayana sutras, there are a number of examples of harsh speech as skillful means. And furthermore, I thought, what Dogen is rebuking can actually be understood as among the 5 grave offenses in Buddhism. That is, causing a schism in the Sangha. It seems to me that any fundamentalist exclusion of any group of people from places of Buddhist practice on the basis of their identifying characteristics or socioeconomic positionalities, their gender, caste, race, age, etc., is a fundamentally divisive practice that splits the Sangha in ways that encourage disagreement among practitioners about the foundational and highest Buddhist teachings. So all of that thinking on my part was in the interest of rationalizing, of trying to reconcile the differences in Dogen in his written teaching, all of which really flew in the face of the passage that I just read to you from the fascicle, the teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha. What was it he said? Do not dislike their shortcomings or judge their activities. Just value their wisdom and feed them daily with 100 or 1,000 ounces of gold. Do not arouse the mind of confusion. This is really hard for us to fully accept in this day and age. So I say we must know that this person is a true teacher, not some charlatan, not some crazy dictator of a totalitarian regime. So while studying this fascicle, I noticed myself expending a tremendous amount of energy engaged in quite a lot of argumentation within myself in an attempt to reconcile the differences. And then I thought, suddenly, go beyond, which is what this fascicle is primarily about, I think. Go beyond what I can only speculate about Dogen's state of mind, his intentions, his consideration, his temper. Go beyond Zen, go beyond Dogen, in order to fully arrive in this present moment of practice realization, in order to fully arrive, prostrate to the marrow of Dogen's sun-face Buddha teaching, and also bow to the marrow, the same marrow, I would say, of his moon-face Buddha teachings, his radical candor and integrity with regard to addressing discrimination among, or rather against, women within the Buddha Dharma. Bow to the way he jumps out quite early in this fascicle with his Kyosaku and offers a litany of fierce blows to the deeply entrenched greed, hate, and delusion within the Mahasangha. Some would say his blows were an expression of grandmotherly kindness. to save his students, to save us all, so-called Buddhists, from falling into Avicii hell or wandering endlessly in samsara. Perhaps it was like that for Dogen then. In any case, we can decide how it will be for us now. When I receive this complex set of teachings from Dogen in a way that leaps beyond Dogen's expression and at the same time totally includes Dogen's expression, then his teachings are able to reach and heal my own greed, hatred, and delusion. Only then can they function as medicine for me. So I think it is up to each one of us to enable these teachings to function as medicine, interestingly. I think this is an example of how medicine and disease cure or subdue each other, to reference another form. The whole of Dogen's teachings, the whole world, is medicine. We have to decide to be healed, as it were, to study the self. His teaching asks us to study the self and continually reminded and encouraged by Dogen to go beyond. He was a master of going beyond his own teaching, again and again, expressing going beyond so profoundly and in many, many cases so poetically. Now, all of that which I referred to as secondary, all of that having been said, I would like to close this talk by reading to you the very beginning of this fascicle. I'll first read to you from the Soto Zen Text Project translation, and then switch over to the translation by Kazutana Hashi. The title again of this translation is Making a Bow and Getting the Marrow. When one practices Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, the most difficult thing is to find a guide. Without taking the form of either male or female, the guide should be a great person, should be such a person, or a person of suchness. It might be a wise friend who is a fox spirit, not a person in past or present, or whether living in the past or present. It will be a face that has gotten the marrow. That is a reference to Weka, the second ancestor. One who is a guide and benefactor. It will be one who is not in the dark about cause and effect. Another reference to koan. One who is you or I or someone else. Another translation is one who recognizes that you and I are just this. Once we have encountered a guide, we should cast off the myriad involvements. And without spending an inch of shadow, without wasting a moment of time, devote ourselves vigorously to pursuing the way. We should practice with mind or with heart. Practice without heart, practice even with half a heart. Thus, we should brush the fire from our heads and study standing on one leg. In this manner, we should practice with urgency and diligent attention. When we do this, we will not be assaulted by the abusive minions of Mara. The ancestor who cut off his arm and got the marrow is not someone else. The master who sloughs off body and mind, drops off body and mind, is ourselves. Getting the marrow and receiving transmission of the Dharma always depends upon utmost sincerity and upon the believing or trusting mind. You attain the marrow and are invariably transmitted Dharma through your utmost sincerity and trusting heart. There is no path that comes from anything other than sincere trust. There is no direction that emerges from itself. Thus, you regard Dharma as weighty and your own body as lightly weighted. You retreat from the world and make the way your abode. If you consider your own body weightier, Dharma is not transmitted to you, and you will not be able to attain the way. Although the aspiration for making Dharma weighty is not limited to a single path and does not depend on instruction from others, let me make 1 or 2 points. Regarding Dharma as weighty means this: if you encounter someone who maintains the great Dharma, having received the acknowledgement, quote, "You have attained my marrow," unquote, whether the person is a pillar or a lantern, Buddha, wild fox, demon, man, or woman, you should put your body and mind on a server's seat and attend to the person even for immeasurable eons. It is common to attain body, which are just like widely spread rice plants, flax, bamboo, or reed, but it is rare to encounter the Dharma. Thank you very much for your attention.